The story begins in the autumn of 1943, in the heart of German-occupied Poland. The once quiet fields of Lublin were now scarred with tank tracks, shell craters, and the burned remnants of barns. The war had reached even the most remote corners of the countryside, and the people who had once lived peaceful, honest lives were now prisoners in their own land. Among them was a man named Janek Kowalski, a simple farmer with rough hands, a quiet demeanor, and an old rusting tractor that had seen better days. Janek had no military training, no weapons, and no desire for glory. His life before the war had been spent tending crops, repairing fences, and caring for his family. But when the Germans came, all that changed. The occupiers took his cattle first, then his wheat, and finally his horses, commandeered for German use. They left him with only his tools, his barn, and a broken-down 1930s Ursus C-45 tractor that no one thought would ever run again. But that old machine, stubborn as the man who owned it, would soon play a role no one could have imagined, a role that would turn an ordinary farmer into an unlikely resistance hero. When the Germans first occupied Janek's village, they established a small outpost in a nearby manor house. It was manned by a dozen soldiers and commanded by an arrogant young lieutenant named Kurt Neumann, who saw the local peasants as little more than laborers to exploit. Every week, they demanded food, grain, and livestock. Anyone who resisted was beaten, imprisoned, or worse. Janek watched it all with a silent fury. He wasn't a man of words, but each demand, each slap, each insult burned in his chest like a coal. He wanted to fight, but how could a farmer take on soldiers with rifles and armored trucks? His answer, as fate would have it, came one cold November morning. A small group of Polish partisans passed through the area, ragged, hungry, and desperate. They were trying to move supplies north but had been cut off by German patrols. Their leader, Tadeusz Rona, was a former mechanic turned resistance fighter. When Janek offered them shelter in his barn, Tadek noticed the old Ursus tractor covered with dust and straw. "That thing still work?" Tadek asked, running a hand over the cracked metal hood. Janek laughed bitterly. "It used to. Before the war. Before the Germans took all the fuel." Tadek grinned. "Maybe we can change that." What followed over the next few nights would become the stuff of whispered legend in the surrounding villages. The partisans and Janek began to tinker with the tractor, using what little they had. They drained leftover oil from abandoned vehicles, used pig fat as lubricant, and mixed kerosene with alcohol to create a crude fuel. Piece by piece, the old machine came back to life. When they finally managed to start it, the roar of the single-cylinder engine was like a war cry. The men laughed, some even cried. It wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol, proof that something broken could live again. But they didn't restore the tractor for farming. They had another idea. Tadek's group had been trying to sabotage a German supply convoy that passed through the main road every Thursday. The trucks were heavily guarded, and the resistance had no anti-tank weapons. But Tadek, ever the mechanic, had a mad idea. What if they turned the tractor into a rolling bomb? At first, Janek refused. "That machine is all I have left," he said quietly. "It was my father's." Tadek looked him in the eye, then let it finish his fight. That night, Janek didn't sleep. He sat in the barn beside the tractor, the dim lantern light reflecting off its battered frame. He thought of his wife, killed by a stray shell 2 years earlier. He thought of his land, his animals, his neighbors taken away in trucks that never returned. By dawn, he made his decision. "We'll do it," he told Tadek. "But it has to count." The plan was simple, at least in theory. They would pack the tractor with explosives stolen from a German munitions dump, artillery shells, grenades, anything they could find. Then they'd camouflage it as a normal farming vehicle and drive it near the convoy route. When the Germans stopped to investigate, they'd trigger the explosion remotely using a hidden wire or fuse. But there were problems. The Germans had patrols everywhere, and moving that much explosive unnoticed was nearly impossible. Worse, the tractor was painfully slow, topping out at barely 15 kilometers an hour. So they came up with a new plan, one even riskier. Janek himself would drive it. He argued, of course. The others offered to go instead, but he wouldn't allow it. "It's my machine," he said firmly. If anyone's going to ride it, it's me. For 2 days, the men worked in silence, transforming the Ursus into a makeshift weapon. They lined the metal panels with sandbags, attached old boiler plates for armor, and loaded the rear compartment with explosives. The crude bomb they built would have made any demolition expert wince, but it would do the job. When it was finished, the tractor looked like something out of a nightmare, smoke belching, armor-plated, and humming with hidden fury. On the morning of November 18, 1943, the fog was thick enough to hide an army. The German convoy, 2 supply trucks, an armored car, and a light tank, moved slowly along the muddy road near the forest's edge. From a distance, it looked like just another peasant working the fields. Janek's tractor sputtered and rattled as he drove it toward the road, pretending to struggle with a plow. The Germans didn't pay much attention at first. Farmers were everywhere, forced to work under occupation. But when the tractor turned sharply toward the convoy, one of the soldiers raised his rifle. Was matched The lieutenant barked, "Stop him." By the time they realized something was wrong, Janek was already too close. The tractor lurched forward, belching black smoke. The German soldiers began firing. Bullets clanged off the crude armor, punching holes through the metal. Inside, Janek gripped the steering wheel tightly. He could smell the oil burning, feel the vibration of the engine beneath his feet. He wasn't thinking of glory or revenge. He was thinking of his wife's smile, the sound of his fields in summer, the life the war had stolen. When he reached the first truck, he shouted something, no one knows what. Some say it was, for Poland. Others say it was simply his wife's name. Then the world exploded. The blast shattered windows 5 miles away. The convoy was obliterated. The truck, the tank, the soldiers, all gone in an instant. What remained of the tractor was twisted metal and smoke. The Germans searched the wreckage for days, but there was nothing left to bury. Janek Kowalski, the quiet farmer, was gone. But his act would echo across the region. For weeks after the explosion, rumors spread like wildfire. Peasants whispered about the Iron Farmer, the man who had turned his tractor into a bomb and wiped out a Nazi convoy. Some said he was a ghost who still rode through the fields at night. Others claimed the explosion had sparked uprisings in nearby villages. The Germans responded with brutality. They burned homes, executed hostages, and posted warnings. Any sabotage will be punished by death. But the fear they had once commanded began to erode. If a farmer with a broken tractor could destroy an armored unit, then maybe, just maybe, the occupiers weren't invincible after all. The story reached the Polish underground in Warsaw, then London, and finally even to Allied ears. A BBC broadcast in early 1944 mentioned a courageous Polish farmer who struck a blow for freedom using nothing but his wits and his machine. To most, it was just a story, one of countless wartime legends. But for those who lived through it, it was more than that. It was proof that resistance came in many forms, sometimes from soldiers, sometimes from spies, and sometimes from a farmer who refused to give up. After the war ended in 1945, investigators from the Polish Home Army tried to piece together what really happened that day. They interviewed survivors from nearby villages, examined the crater left by the blast, and even found fragments of the Ursus tractor's engine block half buried in the soil. Their conclusion was clear. The explosion had been massive, enough to destroy several vehicles and kill dozens of German troops. They confirmed that Janek Kowalski had indeed been the driver. His sacrifice had allowed Tadek's partisan group to escape capture and later assist in liberating several nearby towns. In 1947, a small memorial was built on the spot where the explosion occurred. It was simple, just a piece of twisted metal from the tractor mounted on a stone with the words, "He plowed the fields of freedom with steel and fire." Villagers still leave flowers there every November. Over time, Janek's story faded into the background of history. Poland rebuilt, generations passed, and the war became a subject for books and documentaries. But every now and then, an old man in a village near Lublin would tell his grandchildren about the day the sky caught fire, and how a farmer with nothing left found a way to fight back. The legend of the tractor lived on. In the early 2000s, a historian named Peter Zaleski rediscovered the story while researching rural resistance in Eastern Europe. He found diaries, old radio transmissions, and even a letter from Tadek Rona, written just days before he was killed in 1944. In it, Tadek wrote, "Greater than, he was not a soldier. He was not trained to kill. But he understood something we all forgot, that freedom isn't given, it's made. Even from rust and smoke." The historian published an article, and soon the story reached Polish television. It was turned into a short film, Traktor Bohatera, The Hero's Tractor, which reignited national interest in forgotten rural heroes of the war. Beyond the symbolism, Janek's act also represented a deeper truth about the nature of resistance. Not every weapon of war is forged in a factory. Some are born in barns, fields, and workshops, in the hands of people who refuse to surrender. Throughout occupied Europe, similar acts took place. A French farmer who hid radio operators in his wine cellar, a Danish fisherman who smuggled Jewish families to safety under the cover of night, a Soviet peasant who used his cart to transport stolen German ammunition to partisans. Janek's story was one among thousands, but it resonated because it was so human. He didn't act out of ideology or ambition. He acted because he was tired of watching his world burn. His old tractor, once a symbol of hard work and life, became a weapon of defiance. It was poetic. The very tool that had once tilled the soil for crops now plowed a path to freedom. In 2018, a group of Polish restoration enthusiasts found what they believed to be remnants of the same model of Ursus tractor Janek had owned. They restored it completely, down to the faded green paint and worn iron wheels. The restored tractor now sits in a museum in Warsaw, accompanied by a small plaque that reads, "Dedicated to the farmers who turned their tools of labor into tools of liberation." Visitors stop and stare. Some smile, others weep. It's not just a machine, it's a reminder of what ordinary people are capable of when faced with impossible odds. Even today, historians debate the exact details of the event. Some argue that the explosion was accidental, that Janek never intended to die. Others insist it was a deliberate act of sacrifice. But perhaps the truth doesn't matter as much as what the story represents. In every war, there are names we remember, generals, heroes, leaders, and countless others we forget. But somewhere between those two worlds stand people like Janek Kowalski, the ones who never set out to be heroes, but became them anyway.